Before Angelina Jolie became the world's most powerful Hollywood star, before Brad Pitt, before the endless headlines and the weight of humanitarian work, there was another story. A story far less known, but one that broke the rules of Hollywood tradition and changed how the world saw her. In the mid-1990s, long before she stood as an Oscar-winning actress and a global icon, Angelina was still a young, fiery performer, restless, reckless, and searching for her identity in an industry that demanded conformity. What she found instead was passion, danger, and a love affair that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Even in those early days, Angelina's reputation was already being carved in stone. She was Hollywood's wild child, a woman unafraid of tattoos, obsessed with the darker corners of life, and uninterested in being the wholesome ingenue casting directors wanted her to be. While other actresses polished their image into something glossy and safe, Angelina let hers bleed raw. She spoke about pain, she flaunted her scars, and she wore her rebellion like an accessory. But then came a meeting that would change the course of her life forever. It was 1996, on the set of the film Foxfire. Among the cast was Jenny Shimizu, a Japanese-American model with an edgy, androgynous beauty that shattered every stereotype of what a Hollywood leading lady was supposed to look like. With her cropped hair, sharp jawline, leather jackets, and unapologetic independence, Jenny was a storm. She didn't fit into the glossy, heteronormative world of Hollywood stardom, and that was precisely what made her irresistible. Angelina later confessed she fell in love the very first moment she saw Jenny. It wasn't a slow burn, it was immediate, magnetic, like a current sparking between them. What Angelina found in Jenny wasn't just attraction. It was a connection that burned fast, hot, and without apology. Jenny represented a kind of forbidden love, the kind of romance that tabloids feasted on but which made Angelina's heart beat faster. And remember the time, the 1990s. Same-sex relationships were whispered about, hidden, or denied in Hollywood. Stars lived in closets out of fear their careers would collapse. But Angelina wasn't interested in hiding. For her, this wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was desire, chemistry, freedom. She embraced Jenny with the same ferocity she brought to every part of her life. This is where our story begins. Tonight, we take you deep inside the untold love affair of Angelina Jolie and Jenny Shimizu, two rebels who collided in a moment of passion that defied Hollywood's rules. This was not the kind of romance polished for red carpets, orchestrated by studio publicists. This was raw, messy, and intoxicating. It was the story of a young actress who would go on to rule Hollywood, and the woman who first showed her what it meant to love without limits. Jenny's journey would continue long after those passionate days. She returned to the fashion world, carving out her place as a trailblazer for androgynous beauty, later stepping into activism and ultimately marrying fashion executive Michelle Harper in 2014. Angelina, on the other hand, rose to dizzying heights, Oscar wins, blockbuster films, humanitarian missions, and motherhood. She became one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, but no matter how far she climbed, her bisexual identity always traced back to Jenny. And that's why, decades later, this love story continues to fascinate. Because it wasn't just about scandal. It wasn't just about shock. It was about two women daring to live boldly and unapologetically in a time when the world wanted them to stay silent. Their affair wasn't only real, it was revolutionary. Hollywood in the mid-1990s was a place of glossy facades and rigid expectations. Studios still relied heavily on an image machine that packaged young actresses into safe, marketable molds. The girl next door, the ingenue, the perfect starlet who would smile on red carpets and stay quiet about anything that might offend mainstream audiences. It was the era of Friends on television, Julia Roberts dominating the box office, and Gwyneth Paltrow rising as the chic golden girl. In this environment, individuality was often stifled, and any hint of rebellion could spell disaster for a career. But Angelina Jolie was never meant to play by those rules. She was in her early 20s, an actress just beginning to emerge from the shadow of her famous father, Jon Voight. Jolie wasn't the polished Hollywood princess type. She was intense, magnetic, and a little dangerous. Tattoos snaked across her skin, she spoke openly about dark thoughts, and she wore her emotions as if they were armor. She was searching for her identity, and instead of burying her rawness, she leaned into it. This was a woman uninterested in fitting into anyone's mold. Across the industry, in the world of fashion, another outsider was breaking barriers in her own way. Jenny Shimizu, a Japanese-American model from San Jose, California, had defied the odds by becoming one of the first openly lesbian models to break into the high fashion scene. With her sharp cheekbones, androgynous beauty, and punk-inspired edge, she walked for Calvin Klein and Prada, carving out space in an industry that often celebrated only one type of femininity. Where most models were expected to be fragile and ethereal, Jenny was bold, tough, and unapologetically herself. It was inevitable, in some ways, that these two outsiders, one a rising actress with a hunger for truth, the other a groundbreaking model with defiant style, would collide. And that collision happened on the set of Foxfire in 1996. Foxfire was a film about teenage girls rebelling against authority, about female friendship and freedom. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was raw, gritty, and very much in line with Angelina's emerging persona. Jenny was cast alongside Jolie, marking one of her earliest acting roles. From the beginning, there was an energy between them that went beyond co-stars reading lines. Angelina would later recall the moment with startling honesty. She admitted that she fell in love the first moment she saw Jenny. It wasn't a slow burn, not a gradual realization. It was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. For someone like Angelina, who lived life in extremes, Jenny was irresistible. The chemistry on set was palpable. Angelina, with her piercing blue eyes and restless intensity, and Jenny, with her cool androgyny and confident swagger, seemed to gravitate toward each other in ways that were impossible to ignore. Theirs wasn't the kind of connection built quietly in the shadows. It had sparks that others could feel, even if they didn't understand them. What drew Angelina to Jenny wasn't just physical attraction, though that was undeniable. It was recognition. Both women were outsiders in their industries, both rebels against the neatly packaged ideals of femininity and stardom. Where Hollywood wanted actresses to be glamorous and compliant, Angelina was tattooed and outspoken. Where fashion demanded models be delicate and hyper-feminine, Jenny strutted with sharp lines, cropped hair, and an attitude that refused to be softened. They were, in a sense, mirror images of rebellion. Two women who saw in each other the freedom they craved. Hollywood at the time was not kind to those who stepped outside its norms. The 1990s may feel close to today, but in terms of acceptance, it was a different world. Queer relationships, especially among A-list stars, were hidden or denied. Careers could be destroyed by a single headline. For Angelina to not only engage in this affair but later to speak openly about it was nothing short of revolutionary. And yet, on that set, none of that mattered. It wasn't about fear or consequences. It was about connection. Their bond grew quickly, layered with desire, curiosity, and an almost reckless intensity. Angelina once confessed that she might have married Jenny if she hadn't been married to Johnny Lee Miller at the time. That statement wasn't hyperbole. For Jolie, Jenny was more than a fling, she was a force of nature. Jenny awakened in her a sense of sexual freedom that Angelina had only hinted at before. With Jenny, she didn't have to play roles or hide pieces of herself. She could be wild, vulnerable, and alive. It was this authenticity that ignited a love so powerful and so passionate that even decades later, it remains one of the most talked about chapters in Angelina's life. Against the backdrop of a conservative Hollywood, their relationship wasn't just unusual, it was explosive. It was a declaration that love doesn't follow rules, and desire doesn't obey boundaries. For two rebels, one breaking into film, the other reshaping fashion, the meeting was fate. It wasn't about convenience or publicity, it was about recognition and passion. In each other, they found what so few dared to seek in the 90s, freedom to love outside of expectation. That love, born on a gritty movie set, was the start of something that would forever alter Angelina Jolie's image, her career, and her legacy. For Jenny Shimizu, it would place her in Hollywood history as the woman who captured the heart of one of the most desired actresses in the world. Their story began not as a headline, but as a spark between two women who dared to be themselves when the world wanted them to conform. And from that spark, a wildfire of passion and controversy was born. The spark between Angelina Jolie and Jenny Shimizu quickly turned into a flame that was impossible to contain. What started as attraction on the set of Foxfire in 1996 grew into a steamy, unapologetic relationship that defied Hollywood's rules. For Angelina, this wasn't just a secret fling, it was her first public acknowledgement that her desire didn't fit inside the neat, heterosexual box the industry tried to enforce. Angelina has never been shy about her emotions, and she wasn't about to hide this love. Years later, she would openly say, "I probably would have married Jenny if I hadn't married my husband." That wasn't a throwaway comment. It was a confession of how deeply Jenny impacted her life. She was married to actor Johnny Lee Miller at the time, but her bond with Jenny was so powerful that it shook the foundations of her personal world. Their connection wasn't polished or pretty, it was raw, physical, and electric. The two women didn't try to disguise the passion they shared. When they were together, they radiated a kind of intensity that drew people in and made others uncomfortable. They kissed openly, they touched without hesitation, and they lived as though the world's judgments didn't matter. In the conservative climate of 1990s Hollywood, that was revolutionary and scandalous. The tabloids couldn't get enough. Angelina already had a reputation as the wild child of Hollywood, a woman who wore leather on red carpets, covered herself in tattoos, and spoke casually about darkness and obsession. Adding a same-sex romance to the mix gave journalists fresh fuel. Stories painted her as dangerous, unpredictable, and thrilling. She wasn't the girl next door like Jennifer Aniston, or the glamorous leading lady like Julia Roberts. Jolie was fire, and Jenny was gasoline. For Angelina, Jenny was unlike any of her other loves. Her marriage to Johnny Lee Miller had been tender but short-lived. Her later relationship with Billy Bob Thornton would be fiery, bizarre, and famously eccentric. But Jenny offered something different. Their bond wasn't defined by Hollywood tradition or expectations. With Jenny, there was no script, no carefully staged image, just desire in its purest form. Jenny represented freedom. Angelina didn't have to explain herself or tone herself down. She could surrender completely, and Jenny matched her intensity. Jenny Shimizu herself was no stranger to scandal. Long before same-sex relationships were openly celebrated, she lived her truth as a lesbian in the spotlight. She had a reputation for being bold, fearless, and unapologetic. She was also rumored to have had an affair with Madonna, another pop culture icon who thrived on breaking boundaries. This only added to Jenny's mystique. She was a woman who loved who she wanted, when she wanted, without shame. For Angelina, who was still carving out her identity, Jenny was both a lover and a role model of fearless authenticity. Their affair blurred the line between passion and rebellion. They weren't afraid to show off their connection, and that made people uncomfortable. Hollywood was built on carefully controlled images, and here were two women who shattered that facade. The industry wasn't ready for an actress to proudly admit attraction to another woman, but Angelina didn't care. In interviews, she spoke openly about Jenny, refusing to hide behind euphemisms. It was this honesty that shocked the press and captivated fans. To the outside world, their relationship embodied danger and freedom. Jenny, with her tough androgynous beauty, and Angelina, with her sensual intensity, were the perfect symbols of rebellion. They weren't trying to be palatable or safe. They were sexy, unapologetic, and magnetic. Together, they created a kind of allure that was impossible to ignore. It's important to understand just how radical this was in the 1990s. Today, conversations about sexuality are more open, and stars can more freely express themselves. But back then, an A-list actress acknowledging her bisexuality could be career suicide. Angelina, however, didn't just acknowledge it, she celebrated it. Her love with Jenny wasn't a shameful secret tucked away. It was a declaration that she would live on her own terms, no matter the cost. The press, of course, sensationalized it. Headlines turned their love into gossip, reducing a powerful connection into salacious rumor. But beneath the noise, what they shared was real. For Angelina, Jenny wasn't a publicity stunt. She was the person who allowed her to embrace a side of herself the world wasn't ready for. For Jenny, Angelina was proof that even in Hollywood, where conformity ruled, passion and truth could still burn through the lies. Their relationship didn't last forever, but it left an indelible mark on both of their lives. It was a love that pushed boundaries, one that dared to exist in full view of a judgmental world. It was passionate, scandalous, and unapologetic, everything that defined Angelina Jolie in her rise to fame. Looking back, it's clear that this chapter of Angelina's life wasn't just about romance. It was about identity. It was about rejecting shame. And most of all, it was about living freely, even when the world wanted her to play it safe. Angelina Jolie and Jenny Shimizu, together, embodied a kind of sexy, dangerous freedom that Hollywood didn't know how to handle. And that's exactly why their love story remains one of the most unforgettable scandals of the 1990s. By the time Angelina Jolie's relationship with Jenny Shimizu became public knowledge, the young actress was already building a reputation as Hollywood's bad girl. But it was her unapologetic love for Jenny that transformed her from a rising star into something much larger, a bisexual icon who refused to be tamed by the rules of an industry built on carefully crafted images. In the 1990s, most young actresses in Hollywood were expected to fit into a particular mold. Glamorous, heterosexual, wholesome enough for middle America, yet seductive enough to draw headlines. Think of Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, or Jennifer Aniston. They were the good girls the industry loved to market. Safe, charming, and unthreatening. Angelina Jolie was nothing like that. She wore her tattoos proudly, talked openly about darkness, and when it came to her sexuality, she didn't hide behind coy evasions. She looked at the world and said, "Yes, I love men. Yes, I love women. And what about it?" Her love affair with Jenny Shimizu wasn't a PR stunt, nor was it a whispered rumor, it was boldly acknowledged. When asked about Jenny, Angelina didn't retreat into silence. Instead, she admitted, "I probably would have married Jenny if I hadn't married my husband." That single statement was revolutionary. Here was an actress not only confessing attraction to a woman, but affirming that the relationship was real, serious, and deeply meaningful. In the conservative climate of the mid-90s, that honesty was a shockwave. The ripple effect of this relationship showed up directly in Angelina's work. In 1998, she played supermodel Gia Karanji in HBO's Gia, a role that catapulted her into critical acclaim. Gia was a tragic, rebellious, bisexual icon in her own right, and Angelina poured herself into the performance with such raw intensity that it felt less like acting and more like confession. Critics raved, audiences were mesmerized, and the parallels between Jolie's personal life and her character's fluid sexuality were impossible to ignore. Without Jenny, Angelina may never have leaned into that side of herself so authentically. Jenny was the spark that helped her embrace her truth, and that truth illuminated Gia. The theme continued in 1999 with Girl, Interrupted, where Jolie won an Academy Award for her portrayal of Lisa, a dangerously charismatic woman confined in a psychiatric hospital. Lisa was magnetic, rebellious, sexually fluid, and utterly unrestrained, the very qualities that had come to define Angelina's public image. It wasn't a coincidence. Angelina's own fearlessness in her personal life bled into her characters. Her willingness to love Jenny openly gave her the confidence to embody women who didn't fit neatly into Hollywood's categories. It's worth pausing to remember just how radical this was at the time. In the 90s, coming out as queer, or even hinting at same-sex attraction, could derail an actor's career. Studios wanted bankable stars who didn't alienate middle America. For a young actress at the start of her career to embrace a relationship with another woman and refuse to deny it was practically unheard of. Ellen DeGeneres' coming out in 1997 famously caused her career to nosedive for years. Yet Angelina, instead of suffering, seemed to grow more powerful. Why? Because she didn't apologize. She didn't frame her attraction as a problem or a phase. She owned it, and in doing so, she set herself apart from every other young star in Hollywood. Jenny Shimizu was the catalyst. Jenny lived openly as a lesbian when it wasn't easy. She was tough, androgynous, and magnetic, breaking barriers as an Asian American model in a white-dominated fashion world. For Angelina, Jenny wasn't just a lover, she was a symbol of defiance. Being with Jenny wasn't just about romance, it was about embracing freedom. And that freedom gave Angelina the courage to step into the spotlight as her full self. This authenticity resonated with audiences who rarely saw themselves reflected in Hollywood. For LGBTQ+ fans, Angelina became an unlikely queer icon. She didn't wave a rainbow flag or brand herself as an activist. She simply lived her truth, loudly and unapologetically. That was more powerful than any speech. Fans who were closeted or struggling with their identities saw in Angelina a kind of validation. If the hottest, wildest star in Hollywood could openly love another woman, maybe they could, too. Angelina's bisexuality didn't fade into a whispered footnote of her career. It became part of her legend. Even as she moved on to high-profile relationships with Johnny Lee Miller, Billy Bob Thornton, and eventually Brad Pitt, her connection to Jenny Shimizu lingered in the public imagination. Tabloids could spin her romances however they liked, but Jenny was different. Jenny was the reminder that Angelina would never be confined to Hollywood's narrow definitions of love, sex, or identity. And while critics at the time tried to dismiss her as reckless or scandalous, history has proven that Jolie was simply ahead of her time. Today, stars like Kristen Stewart, Cara Delevingne, and Janelle Monáe can speak openly about queerness without fear of career destruction. But back in the 90s, Angelina and Jenny were pioneers. Their love story cracked open a cultural conversation that Hollywood was desperate to avoid. In the years that followed, Angelina's career soared, and her image evolved. She became not just an actress, but a humanitarian, a mother, and one half of Hollywood's most famous power couple. Yet her identity as a bisexual woman remained an undeniable part of her story, and it all traced back to Jenny. Jenny was the first great love who pushed Angelina into the public light as someone who refused to be boxed in. In the end, their relationship was more than just a romance. It was the foundation of Angelina Jolie's image as a woman who would never play by the rules. Through Jenny, she found the courage to embrace passion without shame, desire without apology, and sexuality without borders. And that defiance, more than anything else, is what made Angelina Jolie unforgettable. Every great love story eventually finds its ending, and for Angelina Jolie and Jenny Shimizu, the flames of passion that once burned so brightly eventually cooled. By the late 1990s, Jolie's career had accelerated at lightning speed. She was no longer the fresh-faced rebel from Foxfire. She was an Academy Award-winning actress with roles that demanded the world's attention. Hollywood was calling, and Angelina was answering. The intensity of her connection with Jenny couldn't survive the tidal wave of fame, opportunity, and shifting priorities. Jolie moved on to high-profile marriages, first with British actor Johnny Lee Miller, whom she famously wed in 1996 wearing black leather pants and a white shirt with his name scrawled across it in her own blood. Later, she embarked on her famously eccentric marriage to Billy Bob Thornton, filled with wild stories of vials of blood worn around their necks and PDA that left tabloids spinning. But no matter how outrageous her subsequent relationship seemed, Jenny remained a constant reference point, an unforgettable first taste of reckless, unapologetic love. When Jolie met Brad Pitt on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004, it marked a turning point not only in her career but also in her global image. Brangelina quickly became Hollywood's most powerful couple, dominating headlines for over a decade. Together, Angelina and Brad built a family, adopted children from around the world, and positioned themselves as humanitarian royalty. Jolie evolved from the wild bad girl into a mother of 6, a UN Goodwill ambassador, and eventually a special envoy, traveling the globe to advocate for refugees and victims of war. Yet even as she transformed, her bisexual identity was never erased. Time and again, in interviews, Jolie affirmed that her attraction to women wasn't a passing phase. "I've loved women in the past," she reminded the public. And for anyone who needed proof, the memory of Jenny Shimizu was always there, lingering in the cultural consciousness. Jenny was the root of Angelina's public embrace of fluidity. Even as Angelina stood on the world's grandest stages, walking red carpets, speaking at the United Nations, adopting and raising a global family, her history with Jenny was woven into her narrative. Jenny, too, moved forward in her own way. After their affair, she returned to the fashion world, continuing to defy stereotypes as one of the few Asian American, openly lesbian models to achieve international recognition. Her presence in campaigns for brands like Calvin Klein and her work as a runway model for designers such as Jean-Paul Gaultier made her a trailblazer. Jenny's tough, androgynous look remained iconic, influencing a generation of models and reshaping fashion's understanding of beauty. But Jenny was never just a model. She became a quiet activist, speaking about LGBTQ+ visibility and living her truth in an era when openness was still risky. In 2014, she married Michelle Harper, a fashion executive known for her eccentric style and commitment to advocacy. Their union was celebrated in fashion circles and the LGBTQ+ community, marking a new chapter in Jenny's life, a settled, grounded form of love that contrasted with the fiery passion of her youth. Yet still, in every article or interview about Jenny, the shadow of her relationship with Angelina Jolie surfaced. Their love had become a cultural reference point, impossible to ignore. What made their relationship so lasting in public memory wasn't just the fact that it was two beautiful women caught in a storm of attraction, it was the context. In the 1990s, same-sex love among celebrities was largely hidden, whispered about, or denied outright. For Angelina to openly declare her love for Jenny was nothing short of revolutionary. It challenged Hollywood's image machine and forced mainstream media to confront a narrative they weren't ready for, that a rising star could love another woman and still thrive. This wasn't just about romance, it was about identity, representation, and change. For young fans struggling with their sexuality, seeing Angelina embrace Jenny without shame was liberating. Here was one of the most glamorous women in Hollywood admitting that her heart and body could belong to a woman as easily as to a man. It shattered the binary narratives of the time and planted seeds for the more open, fluid conversations about sexuality we see today. Even decades later, fascination with Jolie and Jenny remains strong because their story embodies something timeless, the allure of forbidden love. Their affair was raw, passionate, and short-lived, but it also carried the weight of rebellion. In a culture that tried to police women's sexuality, Angelina and Jenny were proof that desire could not be contained. Their story still circulates in documentaries, interviews, and gossip retrospectives, not as a scandal, but as a moment of cultural awakening. For Angelina, Jenny remains a symbol of her most fearless years, a period when she embraced danger, explored her identity, and lived without apology. For Jenny, Angelina was both a lover and a doorway into a permanent place in pop culture. Together, they created a narrative that blurred the lines between Hollywood gossip and cultural revolution. As the years roll on, Jolie and Shimizu's affair is remembered less as a scandal and more as a milestone. It represents a turning point in Hollywood's relationship with sexuality, a moment when bisexuality wasn't hidden in shadows but splashed across headlines. It redefined what a leading actress could be. And it continues to remind us that passion, when lived authentically, leaves an echo that never fades. Their love may not have lasted forever, but its impact did. The world may have moved on, but the story of Angelina Jolie and Jenny Shimizu remains immortal, not just because it was sexy and scandalous, but because it was true. Before Brad Pitt. Before Brangelina. Before the image of Angelina Jolie as Hollywood royalty, there was Jenny Shimizu. This wasn't just a youthful fling or a scandal to be forgotten. It was the relationship that revealed Jolie's wild heart, her fearless sexuality, and her refusal to be boxed in. Their love was both romantic and revolutionary. At a time when few actresses dared to acknowledge bisexuality, Angelina did more than admit it, she embodied it. She spoke about it openly, celebrated it, and in doing so, offered countless fans a new way to see themselves. Jenny, in turn, became more than a lover. She became a symbol of what it meant to live outside of rules. Even as their paths diverged, Jenny moving deeper into fashion and activism, Angelina stepping into motherhood and global fame, the echoes of their passion never fully faded. For many, this story wasn't just about two women who found each other in the chaos of Hollywood. It was about freedom. It was about courage. It was about a kind of love that defied the times. In the end, Angelina Jolie's wild love story with Jenny Shimizu wasn't just about Hollywood gossip or a fleeting affair. It was about the way love shapes us, challenges us, and sometimes defines us. Their passion was a reminder that authenticity is sexier than any script, and that the bravest thing anyone can do is love without apology. In the end, Angelina Jolie's wild love story with Jenny Shimizu wasn't just about two women. It was about freedom, passion, and the courage to live unapologetically.